The Bernhardt Line was a German defensive line in Italy during the Italian campaign of World War II. Having reached the Bernhardt Line at the start of December 1943, it took until mid-January 1944 for the United States Fifth Army to fight their way to the next line of defenses, the Gustav Line. The line was defended by 14th Panzer Corps, part of the German 10th Army. Unlike most of the other defensive lines, it did not run all the way across Italy but was merely a bulge in front of the main Gustav Line, running over the massif of Monte Cammino, enclosing the peaks of Monte Cammino, Monte La Difensa, Monte La Rimettini and Monte Maggiore, in the territory of Roccadevandro, and Monte Sambucaro, which stands at the border of the three regions. However, the defences of the Gustav Line on the Adriatic are sometimes referred to as the Bernhardt Line, and the battles for this part of the line are included in this entry. The Bernhardt Line was not as strong as the Gustav Line and was intended only to delay the Allies' arrival at the Gustav Line. Together with the Gustav Line and the Hitler Line, it made up the German Winter Line defences. Background: following the Allied invasion of Italy in September 1943, the Italian government had surrendered, but the German army continued to fight. The Allied armies succeeded in conquering the southern part of Italy, but by early October had come up against the Volturno Line, the first of two lines used to delay the Allied advance to buy time to prepare the most formidable defensive positions which formed the Winter Line. Alexander had three possible alternatives to reach Rome. On the Adriatic front he could advance to Pescara and then use Route 5, which traversed the country, to Rome on the other coast. Alternatively, on the other side of the Apennines, Highway 7 followed along the west coast but south of Rome ran into the Pontine marshes which the Germans had flooded. Finally, Highway 6 ran in the same direction, but further inland, through the Lira Valley. Order of battle: the German forces in Italy were commanded by Field Marshal Albert Kesselring. The defense of the Winter Line was the task of the German 10th Army under the temporary command of Lieutenant General Joachim Lemelson Heinrich von Viertinghoff, who was in Germany on sick leave. The German 10th Army had Trauert Heer's 76th Panzer Corps deployed on the eastern side of Italy, from the Apennine Mountains to the Adriatic, and Frido von Senger and Detterlin's 14th Panzer Corps on the western side, from the mountains to the Tyrrhenian Sea. The new Allied Supreme Commander of the Mediterranean Theatre was British General Sir Henry Maitland Wilson, replacing U.S. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who had moved to command the forces preparing for Operation Overlord, the Normandy landings. The Allied armies in Italy were commanded by General Harold Alexander. Under his command were two armies. To the left, on the western side of Italy, was U.S. Fifth Army, and to the right, on the eastern side, was British Eighth Army. The U.S. Fifth Army was commanded by Lieutenant General Mark W. Clark and consisted of U.S., French and British units. The British Eighth Army, with British, Indian, New Zealand, Canadian and Polish units, was from early January 1944 commanded by Lieutenant General Oliver Leese after General Bernard Montgomery was also recalled to the United Kingdom to prepare for Operation Overlord. Eighth Army on the Adriatic Winter Line defences. Prelude: on 3 October, a brigade of the British Eighth Army's 78th Infantry Division had crossed the Bifano River to confront the German Volturno-Victor Line defences. A further brigade supported by two commando battalions landed from the sea north of the river at Termoli, and a fiercely contested battle ensued which had hung in the balance when temporary river crossings had been washed away after heavy rains and prevented Allied armour from moving forward. However, the isolated British infantry, reinforced from the sea by a 3rd Brigade, had held out long enough against the tanks of 16th Panzer Division for a new bridge to be laid across the river, and the crisis passed with the arrival of elements of British 4th and 1st Canadian Armoured Brigades. By the 6th of October, the Germans were withdrawing to new defensive positions behind the Trinure River, the Barbara Line. At the Trinure, 8th Army were obliged to pause because it had outrun its supply chain, which stretched back over poor roads to the main ports of Bari and Taranto, 120 miles and 170 miles to its rear. Port and transport capacity had also been affected by the logistic requirements of the Allied Air Force, which was establishing strategic bomber bases around Foggia. The 8th Army attacked across the Trinure on the 2nd of November. By the next day, the German position had been turned and the Germans commenced a fighting withdrawal to the forward winter line positions they were preparing on the ridges behind the Sangro River. Advance across the Sangro. The 8th Army's forward units had reached the Sangro on the 9th of November. Alexander had planned for Montgomery to strike across the river on its coastal plain on the 20th of November with the 5th Corps. In secrecy, Montgomery shifted the Indian Division to the right to narrow the 5th Corps front and concentrate its power, bringing the newly arrived 2nd New Zealand Division into the gap. 8th Army also devised a deception scheme involving false troop movements and ammunition dumps to give the impression that the main attack would be through the British 13th Corps front. The deception was to be maintained by an earlier diversionary attack some 40 miles inland by 13th Corps and a secondary attack at the same time as V Corps some 15 miles inland by the New Zealanders. However, Kesselring divined the Allies' intentions. On the 18th of November, Lemelson had signalled Kesselring to the effect that the Allied concentrations on the coast led him to expect the main attack on his left wing. Then heavy rain raised the river levels, forcing the postponement of the offensive to the night of the 27th of November and giving the Germans time to switch 2 divisions across the Apennines to the defending 76th Panzer Corps. This made 3 divisions on the coastal plain opposing 5th Corps, 65th Infantry Division, 90th Panzer Grenadier Division and 26th Panzer Division. 16th Panzer Division opposed the New Zealanders and the German 1st Parachute Division faced 13th Corps. In the early hours of the 28th of November, the 8th Army attack went in supported by heavy artillery concentrations. The New Zealanders advanced steadily. Although the German defences had been well prepared, most of the New Zealanders' objectives were manned by 65th Division, which was poorly equipped and untried in battle. The German division was also hampered by the fact that their commander, Brigadier General G.H. von Zeilberg, was severely wounded on the afternoon of the 28th of November. The 8th Indian Division, however, like the New Zealanders facing their first major combat action since arriving in Italy, experienced tougher opposition. Elements of 65th Infantry Division, supported by an armoured battle group, held tenaciously on to Mezzagrogna, and the town was eventually taken on 29 November after tough, often hand-to-hand, fighting. On the morning of the 29th of November, 78th Infantry Division had joined the attack on the right of the Indian Division and had forced their way to Santa Maria by the evening, creating a base for their main attack the following day towards Fossa Sesia. By late on the 30th of November, 78th Division, supported by 4th Armoured Brigade, had taken Fossa Sesia and the whole ridge on the far bank of the Sangro, carrying the main Bernhardt defences, was under 8th Army control. As the 8th Army pushed forward over the next few days, 65th Infantry Division crumbled. However, Hare was able to introduce 90th Panzer Grenadier Division into the line from his reserve and transferred reinforcements from the quieter sector inland, in the form of elements of 1st Parachute Division. The complications of these maneuvers introduced considerable confusion within the German alignment, but they were nevertheless able to manage a fighting withdrawal to the ridge on the far side of the Moro River. Unaware of the disorganization in the German ranks, the New Zealanders failed on the 2nd of December to exploit an opportunity to capture Orsogna, a key position near the headwaters of the Moro, which on that day was still only lightly held. It was only on the morning of the 3rd of December that the New Zealand Division disputed possession of Orsogne, but 26th Panzer had just enough breathing space to organize and were able to repel them. The 26th Panzer then proceeded to create a formidable defensive complex around the town and along the ridge towards Ortona on the coast, and Orsogne was not occupied by the Allies, despite a further two determined attempts during December, until the Germans withdrew after the Allied breakthrough at Cassino in May 1944. The Moro offensive Montgomery now rested 78th Division, swapping with 1st Canadian Infantry Division from the relatively quiet 13th Corps sector. The Canadians, with 8th Indian Infantry Division on their left, led the main thrust across the Moro on the 8th of December, aiming for Ortona. By the 20th of December, after a stubborn resistance, first from elements of the 90th Panzer Grenadier Division and then elements of the 1st Parachute Division, they had patrols on the outer skirts of the town. But the battle for Ortona took another week of fierce house-to-house fighting as the German 3rd Parachute Regiment tenaciously held on before withdrawing to the other side of the Richo River on the 28th of December. Meanwhile, inland 5th Corps, Orsogne had suffered 3 successive assaults, but 13th Corps, spearheaded by 2nd New Zealand Division, could not get past the defending 26th Panzer Division. After advancing a total of only 18 miles and sustaining 6,500 casualties, blizzards, drifting snow and zero visibility at the end of December in jagged terrain caused 8th Army's offensive on the Adriatic front to grind to a halt. As the new year approached, it became clear that with no prospect of better weather until the spring, 8th Army did not have the strength to force its way to Pescara. Alexander called a halt to the offensive, instructing Montgomery to maintain sufficient activity to pin 76th Panzer Corps and prevent troops from being sent across to reinforce 14th Corps, facing 5th Army. The rest of the winter on the Adriatic front was spent in bitterly uncomfortable conditions, with the opposing sides often in close proximity and engaged in nighttime patrolling and vicious skirmishing. 5th Army Bernhardt Line offensive. It had taken the U.S. 5th Army in deteriorating weather as the torrential autumn rains broke from the middle of October to early November to fight their way across difficult terrain and through skillful and determined rearguard defenses from the Volturno Line positions to the Bernhardt Line. In the center of the 5th Army front lay the Manana Gap, which, because of the marshy conditions on the coastal plain, represented the only realistic path to the mouth of the Lira Valley, the route to Rome. Flanking and overlooking Route 6 through the Manana Gap and its villages are, successively, Monte Camino, Monte Lungo, Monte Porcia and Monte Trocchio on the left, and Monte San Croce, Monte Corno, Monte Sambucaro and Monte Mayo on the right. Monte Sambucaro normally appears as Monte Samucro on Allied maps of the time. On reaching the Bernhardt positions, an immediate attack was launched by British 10th Corps on Monte Camino on the 6th of November, which was beaten back by 15th Panzer Grenadier Division. By mid-November, it was clear that after having sustained 10,000 combat casualties since the Volturno Line offensive, 5th Army needed to pause, reorganize and regather its strength. The U.S. 5th Army resumed its attack on the 1st of December. The first attack, Operation Raincoat, was delivered, after an intensive artillery and air bombardment, by British 10th Corps on the left and elements of U.S. 2nd Corps, including 1st Special Service Force, on the right against the formidable Camino Hill mass. The dominating peak on Monte Camino, Hill 963, is crowned by a monastery. Two slightly lower peaks, Monte La Difensa as it appeared on the military maps during the war, and Monte La Rimettini, lie less than 2 miles north of Camino. At the upper end of the Camino feature are the numerous peaks of Monte Maggiore, The entire hill mass is about 6 miles long and 4 miles wide. On the east and northeast the slopes rise steeply to the heights, then fall away gradually to the west toward the Garigliano River. It took until the 9th of December before the Camino Mas was secured from the 15th Panzer Grenadiers. Meanwhile, on the Fifth Army's right flank, U.S. 6th Corps had attacked into the mountains but made little progress until reinforced by the mountain troops of the French Expeditionary Corps. Recently arrived in Italy, they attacked again on the 15th of December. On the 8th of December U.S. 3rd, 36th Infantry Divisions and 1st Special Service Force of U.S. 2nd Corps launched the attack on Monte Sambucaro and into the Manana Gap. By the night of the 10th of December, the peaks were taken, threatening the German positions in the gap. The Germans could no longer expect to hold San Pietro when the dominating ground on both flanks, Monte Lungo and the Sambucaro peaks, was in 2 Corps' possession. Under the cover of a counterattack, German forces withdrew to positions about 1 mile to their rear, in front of San Vittore. Several attacks were made in the next days, and Morello Hill, overlooking the San Vittore positions from the north, was captured on the 26th of December. On the 6th Corps front, progress was made but proved very difficult over the mountainous terrain as the weather deteriorated further with the onset of winter. During the month of December, U.S. Fifth Army suffered 5,020 wounded, but total admissions to hospital totaled 22,816 with jaundice, fevers and trench foot prevalent. At the end of December, U.S. Fifth Army had to pause once again to reorganize, replace its losses and gather itself for a final push to reach the Gustav Line defenses. U.S. 6th Corps was taken into reserve to train and prepare for the Anzio landings with the French troops, by this time at corps strength, taking over their front. U.S. 2nd Corps returned to the attack on the 4th of January 1944, with attacks parallel to Route 6 north and south of it. The northern attack took San Vittore, and by the 7th of January the overlooking height of La Chiaia. On the south side, the attack was made from Monte Lungo and captured Monte Porcia. Meanwhile, on their left, British 10th Corps had attacked from positions on the Camino Mas to take on the 8th of January the Cedro Hill, which with Monte Chiaia and Monte Porcia had formed a strong defensive line in front of Monte Trocchio. The last offensive to clear the enemy in front of the Gustav defenses started on the 10th of January. Cervaro was taken on the 12th of January and the overlooking hills to the north on the 13th of January. This opened up the northern flank of Monte Trocchio, and a heavy assault was planned for the 15th of January. However, the German 14th Panzer Corps considered the position to be untenable and withdrew across the Rapido. When 2nd Corps moved forward on the 15th of January, they encountered no resistance. Aftermath. It had taken the U.S. Fifth Army 6 weeks of intense combat and 16,000 casualties to advance the 7 miles through the Bernhardt Line defenses, including the action at San Pietro in Fini, to take Monte Trocchio and to reach the positions facing the main Gustav defenses on the 15th of January.